Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in commemorating Holocaust Memorial Day. Many members will be signing the Book of Remembrance. Many will be attending the event tomorrow. We have to teach all generations that the descent into Nazism and the Holocaust must never, ever be repeated anywhere on this planet. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Foreign Secretary that the National Health Service needs an extra £5 billion?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think the right honourable gentleman, as I recall, was here in this chamber for the autumn budget that was given by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, where he announced that we'll be putting £6 billion more into National Health Service.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The only problem with that, Mr. Speaker, is it was £2.8 billion spread like thin gruel over 2 years.
Yes, that's right.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told the House, and I quote, "It is indeed the case that the NHS was better prepared this winter than ever before." 68 senior A&E doctors have written to the Prime Minister about what they describe as very serious concerns we have for the safety of our patients. They say patients being treated in corridors are dying prematurely. Who should the public believe? The Prime Minister or A&E doctors?
Prime Minister.
It is right that the NHS was better prepared for this winter than it ever has been before. We saw 3,000 more beds being brought into use over the winter period. We saw the use of the 111 call system actually leading to a significant reduction in the number of call-outs, the number of people having to go into hospital. We have seen the changes that have been made in accident and emergency with the GP streamlining, actually helping to ensure that people who do not need to go into hospital went into hospital. Overall, we have seen 2.8 million more people last year visiting accident and emergency than did so in 2010. Our NHS is indeed providing for patients. There are winter pressures. We were prepared for those winter pressures, and we will ensure, as we have done every year under this Conservative government, that the NHS receives more funding.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, since 2010 we've lost 14,000 NHS beds. The King's Fund, the Health Foundation and Nuffield Trust all agree the NHS needs another £4 billion. In December, the month just gone, the NHS England recorded its worst ever A&E performances, with more patients than ever waiting over 4 hours. Now, the UK Statistics Authority say the numbers may be worse because the figures have been fiddled. Can the Prime Minister tell the House when figures calculated in line with previous years will be published?
Prime Minister.
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that the NHS is open in publishing a whole variety of figures in relation to the targets that it has. We are putting more money into the NHS year in and year out, and we are continuing to do that. But if he wants to talk about figures and about targets being missed, yes, the latest figures show that in England 497 people were waiting more than 12 hours. But the latest figures also show that under the Labour government in Wales, 3,741 people were waiting more than 12 hours.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is responsible for the underfunding of the Welsh Government and the needs of Wales. And despite that, the overall Welsh Labour health budget has grown by 5% in 2016-17. It's Labour Wales with a problem of underfunding from a Conservative government based in Westminster. So far, Mr. Speaker, this winter, 100,000 patients have been forced to wait more than 30 minutes in the back of an ambulance in NHS England, for which she is responsible. Yet still, the Prime Minister refuses to give the NHS the money it needs. Can she tell us how many more patients will face life-threatening waits in the back of ambulances this winter?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that of course we want to ensure that people aren't waiting in those ambulances. But the only answer he ever comes up with is the question of money. The question... No. This is... No. The question is this. Why are there some hospitals where the percentage of patients waiting more than 30 minutes is 0, and other hospitals where the percentage of patients waiting more than 30 minutes is considerably higher? And if he wants to talk about funding, perhaps we should look at what the Labour Party promised at the last general election last year. Well, it's all very well shadow ministers shouting about the comparison of money. The point is that at the last election, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said this: Labour and the Conservatives are pretty much on the same page. There's not much to choose between them in terms of the money they'll put into the NHS.
Corbyn!
A Labour government wouldn't be underfunding the NHS. A Labour government wouldn't be privatising the NHS. A Labour government wouldn't be underfunding social care. A Labour government would be committed to an NHS free at the point of use as a human right. Mr. Speaker, according to a whistleblower, as many as... Hang on. According to a whistleblower, as many as 80 patients were harmed or died following significant ambulance delays over a 3-week period this winter. This is a very serious situation, and the Prime Minister must be aware of it. What investigation is the Department of Health carrying out into these deeply alarming reports?
Prime Minister.
Right, honourable gentleman, that when we hear reports of that sort, of course they are very alarming. And that is why the Department of Health does make sure that investigations do take place. Now, that may be undertaken by the Department of Health or by the particular trust involved, the ambulance trust or the hospital. But these issues are properly investigated because we don't want to see that happening. We do want to see people being properly cared for. And if there are lessons to be learned, then they will be learned. Because what we want to do is our support for the NHS is about providing it with the funding, the doctors, the nurses, the treatments, the capabilities that it needs in order to be able to deliver for patients. That's why we're backing the NHS with more funding. That's why we're ensuring they get the best treatments, and survival rates for cancer are higher than they've ever been before. It's why we're ensuring we have better joined-up services across the NHS and social care, so those people who don't need to go into hospital are able to be cared for at home. And it's why we're ensuring that we're reducing waste in the NHS, so taxpayers' money is spent as effectively as maybe on patient care. That's a plan for the NHS, but it's a plan that puts patients first.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must be aware of ambulances backed up in hospital car parks, with nurses treating patients in the back of ambulances, ambulance drivers and paramedics desperate to get on to deal with the next patient, can't leave because the patient they're dealing with at that moment can't get into the A&E department. It's been reported that a man froze to death waiting 16 hours for an ambulance. Last week, a gentleman called Chris wrote to me saying, "My friend's 93-year-old father waited 4 hours for an ambulance after a fall." These are not isolated cases. These are common parlance all over the country. It needs money, it needs support, and it needs it now. The Prime Minister is frankly in denial about the state of the NHS. Even the absent Foreign Secretary recognises it, but the Prime Minister isn't listening. People using the NHS can see from their own experience it's being starved of resources. People are dying unnecessarily in the back of ambulances and in hospital corridors. GP numbers are down, nurses are leaving, the NHS is in crisis. Mr. Speaker, Tory MPs might not like it, but I ask this question of the Prime Minister. When is she going to face up to the reality and take action to save the NHS from death by 1,000 cuts?
There is only one part of the NHS that has been seen a cut in its funding. It's the NHS in Wales under a Labour government. This is a government that is backing the NHS plan, that is putting more money into the NHS, that is recruiting more doctors and nurses, that is seeing new treatments come on board which ensure that people are getting the best treatment that they need. Because this is a government that recognises the priorities of the British people. Priorities to ensure that our NHS remains a world-class healthcare system, indeed the best healthcare system in the world. Priorities to build the homes that people need, to make sure that our kids are in good schools. This is a government that is building a country that works for everyone, and a country in which people can look to the future with optimism and hope.
Chris Green.